welcome to a highly informed podcast brought to you by Benzinga. I'm your host, Jon Purow. Now, before we get to an interview I'm very excited about, I want to note that any opinions I express are my own and not those of my law firm, Greenspoon Marder or Benzinga. And I just want to do a quick prayer to the video chat gods. May our Wi-Fi connections be sturdy, all dogs and children remain quiet, and my Amazon Prime another time. Amen. All right, now I have the pleasure of introducing the Rosie Mattio, the founder of Mattio Communications, the largest cannabis-focused marketing and public relations agency in North America. Rosie, so happy that we got to, make this happen finally.
I'm so happy to be here today, and I've been trying to do this for a while. I'm always so grateful that you have so many of the Mattio clients on, so I feel very lucky that you wanted to have me on today, so thanks.
No, look, I mean, the fact of the matter is I've been really excited about this because I think that you have probably a completely unique perspective on this industry with the number of years, which I believe now it's a decade that you've been in the industry, and how you've been able to build your company up. And before I get into any of the questions, I always like to call it like I see it. And I have to say that it has always been so impressive to me that any interaction with any member of your team has been so positive. So we'll have to. So actually, no, I'm going to call an audible. The first question is, how did you grow? How do you scale? Right? How do you maintain quality as you grow the way that you do? In an industry like this.
This is what I think about all day long, right? Because my name is on the door, but given our growth, it's really, the people in the agency that do, the work day in, day out. So it really comes down to the fact that we take a very, long time to hire a person, right? They say, hire slow, fire fast. We try not to fire people. It doesn't happen very often here, but we've got an amazing recruiter. And just the way I interview, I really just try to get a sense of a person. There's people always ask, in their interview process, what makes somebody successful at Mattio? And I say it's a very, very technical thing. You've got to give a shit. And that's really what it is. I've hired people who really take so much pride in their work. They celebrate the wins for their clients as their own. And that's something I don't think that can be taught. It's just something I think innate in good publicists. And that's really what it is. They actually really, really care about their clients. Nobody's 9 to 5 here, even though those are the hours.
It makes a lot of sense. I was like, I've been in the position where I've hired people and stuff. And I said, like, you can't change enthusiasm. Right. And enthusiasm can lead to that persistence to get those, positive results. So, it makes a lot of sense. Now, you touched upon it, right? So I have to ask, what's like the biggest perk of having your company named after you? You are never someone who would be like, do you know who I am? But like, have you ever been in funny situations where someone, at the company like doesn't, know that this is, the Rosie? So what are the perks, the upsides, the downsides?
It's actually funny. Like, I wouldn't say there are that many, like, I would say when we were, just to give a little bit of backstory. So I was a solo practitioner for the first 8 years of this agency, right? So I did it on my own for 8 years. And then my first 5 years. In the past 5 years, we've had like a whole agency. So I used to be Rosie Mattio PR. And then when we institutionalized and turned this into a real agency, my business partner who runs it back and was like, well, are you sure you want to call it, Rosie Mattio PR because you knew we were going to do other services? I'm like, well, everybody knows like my name. So if we went to be like Green Communications, like we've lost all the brand equity because I built myself as a solo practitioner. So we decided Mattio Communications, and he was like, all right, whatever you say. But when your name is on the door, everybody sort of wants you, right? I can't be like, so if there's like a conference or there's an interview, I'm like, well, there's so many other people in the agency who are so confident, but when your name's on the door, everybody wants you. So I think that's the only downfall where like I really can't separate myself that often. But otherwise, it's all perks. I take so much pride in the work and so much pride in the team that I feel proud that my name is on the door.
Yeah, I think you might be the only person I know in the industry, right, who's basically like, your last name is known. And then I've also been in multiple conversations where people just talk about Rosie and everyone knows exactly who we're talking about. So I think that you're like a twofer, that you might be the only one who's been able to pull that off. So congratulations on that. Congratulations in pod punnery, I have to say. So now,
I like I love it.
Oh yeah, no, all the dad jokes and need to talk about cannabis that the wife and daughters don't appreciate. This is where it goes.
Exactly. So why we do this.
Yeah.
I get a little hot trees. I put a little bit of low air on. Okay, we're good.
Okay. All right. So now, so as I mentioned, right? So I think this is, Mara Wazzle Tov is 10 years in the industry, if I, recall correctly from reading on the bio and everything. So, look, we are as a unit trying to kind of fight a stigma that's, got entrenched over decades of an unfair and awful war on drugs. Now, what do you think are kind of some of the biggest milestones to date that have helped us chip away at that stigma, in your past, decade in the industry?
Oh God, there've been so many the past 10 years. And when I say it out loud, or somebody says it out loud, I say, wow, I cannot believe I've been doing this for 10 years. But when I look back, like so many ups and downs, so many things have changed. So listen, I still think there's work to be done around stigmatization, but I'll just give like a personal anecdote or a company story, just like where our intersection here, how things have changed. So when I first started out in 2014, when I took on my first client, the first I kind of did it because I came from food PR. I didn't come from cannabis, and I took a cannabis cookbook was my first project. So I pitched all like my food editors at the mainstream outlets, and it was one of the first cannabis cookbooks there were. And it was very buzzy the way they did it. And New York Times, the best company in Nashville, wrote the story. So that was super exciting because it was so new, but it was like quirky. That's why they did it. It was super quirky and it was clickbaity and it was fun. But then when I started really doing this as a job and wanting to institutionalize or mainstream some of these businesses or brands we were working with, I thought it'd be just very simple. I would go to the fashion reporters, the lifestyle reporters at Vogue and Oprah and all these magazines that I'd worked with in food for many years, and I would pitch cannabis to them and they would pick it up. But we got the door slams on us from 2014 to 2018. It took 4 years for us to really educate these New York-based lifestyle reporters that cannabis was not your dime bag cannabis. These things were looking like mainstream CPG products, have like the safety, the education, and really getting to understand like what was happening and that this was going to be part of mainstream culture and CPG. And then in 2018, I always talk about this, we got the first 2 stories I've written in Vogue and Oprah because of this 4 years of educating these reporters. We brought them on press tours. And then from 2018, that's when California turned on and became a little bit more acceptable because this huge market turned on. California's lands of the brand. There started to be more of an uptick of mainstream media. So, and over the past 4 years, because the ups and downs, they're covering it, maybe not as regularly, but more regularly than they were. So the fact of this proliferation of mainstream media covering it, like that's really been, at least from our seat, where we've seen so much change, right? And now there are beat reporters at many of these mainstream outlets. So that's one of the biggest changes I've seen.
Yeah, so you had to kind of open those doors, and you said it was an education process. And now with 2018, so you think California made a big dent. Obviously, the other thing that happened in 2018 was the Farm Bill, right? Which then resulted in
California and Canada.
Yeah, and Canada, exactly, right? So I think that, obviously all these things kind of contributed. And look, and what happened after the Farm Bill, the first batch of things were the CBD explosion, right? And that was good in the sense that it's non-psychoactive products, right? That get people to open to the idea of, there's cannabis, components of it that don't get you high. So I think that probably also, when you think about it, helped at least a little bit in terms of fighting, some of the stigmas and everything. The industry focuses a lot, in terms of what I like to call the connoisseurs, right? Mostly the smokers, flowers, know their strains, might even know their terpene profiles, right? And the kind of curious, okay? The people who are trying to cross over, the people who will never smoke. And so I'm just kind of curious to know, with the different, clients that you have and everything, what have been some of the most like effective strategies in terms of catering to these two very, kind of different demographics?
Yeah, so I think this comes down to like cannabis is not, this is how we've always approached it. And I've ever thought about this. Cannabis as a product, yes, while like it's highly regulated and yes, there are nuances in it. If we're thinking about cannabis as a brand, we need to think about it like we would any other brand. Like if I worked for a sneaker company, right? And I have shoes for tennis players and basketball players and people maybe who are non-athletic or use it for lifestyle, right? You don't, just because we're Nike, we just can't say we're Nike and go to the same editors and talk just about shoes, right? We need to find the right editor, right demographic, right influencers for each product. So people who take this large, and this is a conversation I actually have with the team when I'm onboarding people, and because I think also what sets us apart, I hope you see this, when we pitch a reporter, we try to be very highly targeted, right? So just because you cover cannabis doesn't mean you should cover every single cannabis story that there is. Maybe you, because like you touch a lot of things, but if I am a regulatory reporter, if I find out one of my clients pitched them a new beverage, I'm going to be really pissed off because that's just not targeted. It doesn't make sense. So when we work, our clients have products that range for the cannister, from those daily smokers who want, who are so well educated, to people who are just entering the market because it's new to them, their first time in a dispensary. So we craft every campaign very targeted to the demographic and to the product. And like I said, it's not reinventing the wheel. It's taking real marketing practices and applying it to cannabis. And that's really like how we've always approached. And I think, why we've grown, because we are able to take that, deeply rooted in cannabis, believe in the plants and all the properties, but realize how people need to digest information.
Yeah, got it. So meet people, focus, right, is, sometimes, harder than you would think, right? But like keeping focus to the specific demographics and everything like that, it really, really helps. You're going a little bit more along those lines. One of the things I think has been very, very interesting about, the industry, and has potentially led to some problems, right, is that it's on high dose products, right? That there is, the connoisseurs, there's become this fascination with the THC percentage, right? It doesn't actually determine the effects, right? We know that things like terpenes have a lot more, of a dent, but there's that focus, and it's led to, there's just like lab shopping and everything. But, kind of my thing is, and perhaps it's just because of my tolerance level, I think that there's going to be this big rise of low dose products. And so I was curious to know, what you thought about, the possibility of low dose products. And also, like, frankly, I think that we're seeing some hemp D9 beverages cross over. I'm getting family members who've never touched anything in cannabis, calling me up and being like, oh, hey, we ordered these hemp D9 beverages and they came to us. And I just want to link that up with also, at the same time, I'm very excited about on-site consumption, right? Because I feel like that's bringing something different to the table. If we're looking at what is the regulated market bringing to the table that's different and we haven't seen in the illicit market, on-site consumption, right? In like a really cool way. So I was curious to know, like, your thought about, low dose products, and if, they're going to kind of continue to grow, is on-site consumption going to help them? Just your general thoughts from your macro viewpoint of the entire industry.
So there's a lot there. And, I think there's one, I think, commonality among both this idea of like a low dose product and on-site consumption. I want to get into a bunch of these things, is this normalization of it, right? So let's talk about on-site consumption, on-prem, right? I'm going to get the number wrong, but it could be 25 to 30% of all alcohol sales are on-prem, in a restaurant, in a bar, in a nightclub, at a sports stadium, right? That isn't like available to us right now, except you're starting to see some of the D9 products pop up in some of the states and some restaurants, which is like super cool. I know in Connecticut, you can go to some of these like high-end restaurants in Westport and get a hemp cocktail. So like that's part of the normalization. Just like I could order 6 martinis, and I hope people don't do that, and drive home, right? Like you can start ordering cocktails in a restaurant. Like that is very cool. I also think about the low dose for a few reasons. One, like there isn't this big Canna Curious, right? And there's this move, and they're nervous. They don't want to get like rocked out of their mind on the first consumption. We'll always talk about the Maureen Dowd story, over consuming an edible or a drink. Like, we all know it can be an issue. So I think the low dose is a great way to get new people comfortable with the market, especially the drinks, in a form factor they're used to. Everybody has a cocktail after work, whether it be a hot tea or adult beverage or something. Now there's a cannabis available to you. So I think that's really interesting. And also, we're seeing all these studies that people are trying to drink less, right? Forget about the Canna Curious. People, we're seeing, Gen Z drinking less. We see the decline of alcohol. We're seeing more, non-alc drinks at bars or at concerts or at festivals. So this is very on trend. So I do believe that that this is part of the normalization. And also in terms of normalization, now that you're seeing these D9 or D8, whatever, D9 hemp-derived beverages at your local, Binny's wine market or whatever it is,
Total
Total
Wine.
Wine, right?
Yep.
Like, you go into dispensary if you haven't been before. My mother went for the first time and she was pleasantly surprised how like normal it was. But there's a lot of fear about going to dispensary, what it could be like, especially in some of these, if a lot of them aren't strip malls or whatever it is, in many of the markets. But if you're going to pick up if I'm a mom and I'm going to pick up my Chardonnay for my afternoon play date, this stuff is so lame, by the way. The people still talk about the Chardonnay moms, but that's neither here nor there. If I'm seeing an end cap, these beautiful looking cocktails, I would try that. So I think that's the big part of it. I think that is like you asked me the previous question, what some of the changes are into destigmatization. I think it's a low dose, and I do think it's this D9. I will say though, I'm not like 100% rah these drinks, only for one reason. Listen, the consumer wants it, and if it's done and it's tested, safe, regulated, and I don't think some of these large distributors would be putting stuff in total that are not passing the snuff. So I'm not really that concerned about that. It's just that we're still so early innings on cannabis, right? And there's still so much education around what is a product, what does cannabis do, and that we're sort of like, we haven't even educated the consumer about what like the regulated cannabis dispensary model market is, to then sort of pull them away from there and introduce this new product. We're only in inning one of that. To me, is a little scary when we've invested so much time and energy into building the supply chain for the regulated market. That's the thing that sort of keeps me up at night a little bit. But overall, like I said, the mainstreaming and normalization that people are choosing a plant-based product is a win.
I think you're so right there, right? In terms of like, we're trying to educate, right? We're trying to educate people, who are not as familiar with it, say like people in, our age groups or up who haven't been into cannabis or whatever, we're trying to cross them over, and it could get very, very confusing very, very quickly, right? And like, for example, we use sativa and indica as a shorthand. They're completely flawed terms, right? Like really,
Totally.
Honestly, like I understood the deep dive, and it's BS. Like even historically, it was like one botanist. It was like climate change. It was like 99% of everyone didn't think it was a separate plant, and then this guy comes along and somehow he's the one who wins out historically. And so like we need a shorthand, right? And it needs to be something more like an upper and downer kind of thing, right? And but you just need the shortcuts. You need to be able to communicate information to consumers and get them open to things very, very quickly, right? And so we rely on that as a crutch, right? But at the same time, like I think what you said is like so astute in the sense of, hemp beverages and cannabis and D9 and D8, it's a bit much, right? And there's also always that fear, right? When we're the people who are really invested in the industry and who know, right, all the good that it can do, is, like the vaping crisis, right? Back in 2018, 2019, it then turned out to be in the illicit market. Right. And then I loved it because the spin from the regulated market was this wouldn't have happened here,
Right.
And I thought that was a very, very good spin. But I think also part of my concern with the hemp products is the lack of regulation. Right. Like, and that's why I think that legitimate folks on the hemp side. Right. And, we've seen a lot of people cross over, frankly, because they've had tough times to state license is, the legitimate people want to be tested. Right. They want to be we're all just ultimately we're not looking to hurt anybody, right? You're not going to succeed that way. We are looking to give consumers consistent, safe products where they know what they're getting, best as they can. And so I just think that that's very, very interesting in terms of you got to spoon feed these concepts to people very, very, in a very, very focused fashion, or else, it could essentially set the cause back. So I appreciate that specific point. Now, we're talking about some of the hemp stuff that can be travel across state lines, but, we are in such an idiosyncratic industry because of, the federal illegality creating all these different state little, microcosms, right? So it's got to be a little, and every single state has its own regulations. Every single state has its own rules about advertising and promoting products. So how do you folks approach when you're, working with a big multi-state, operator or something, and you're trying to work on, a campaign that crosses state lines to make sure that it's, it works everywhere the way that you intend?
it's actually, it's incredible what a challenge it is. And I talk about this often. People say, what are the challenges? So you know, every state has also like different product lines. So that's something else entirely. It's different regulations. But I always say before, like I mentioned earlier, before I came to cannabis, I worked in food PR, right? I worked for a popcorn company, was one of my clients. So we had one of ours was like a healthy popcorn. So what did we do when we were launching this healthy popcorn, this lower fat popcorn? Was, we really wanted Shape magazine to write about it. We really wanted Women's Health, which was based in LA, to write about it. So what did we do? We picked up the popcorn, from the factory, right? We went back there, made a beautiful press package, went to FedEx, shipped it out. They tried it. They wrote about this. Okay, so let's play this out in cannabis. We've got an incredible new product launching in Illinois. The reporter is in New York City. How the hell are they going to try it and write about it? It's a real challenge. So what we've had to do actually is do press trips, fly them out to Chicago, and give them a whole cannabis experience, which is great. It's a great relationship building, and it's very successful. But flying out 10 reporters to Chicago for 2 days, a lot more expensive than overnighting during FedEx. So it is challenging, but we do try to do workarounds. One of them is trips. That's not always in. Not everybody has a budget to do that, but really, and we live for the national media. We love it. It's always so exciting. But really, local people, if I'm in Chicago, I'm reading the Tribune or reading the Sun-Times. So we spend a lot of time cultivating relationships in each specific market with reporters and influencers and bloggers to really get them to understand and really make it more community-based, right? Still like so early days. So that's one thing, really, focusing on hyper local, but also, some of the regulations in some of these markets, like sometimes we have to pass some of our pitches by the regulator to make sure we're not saying anything. So it is very interesting working in marketing in this industry, just because we have our hands tied behind our back in so many different ways. And I've even touched on the social network part of it, right? So forget about, each state by state, but, Meta, really, they don't like us too much. They really don't. So how do you, gain awareness in a market? When I had a popcorn company, we could boost the post. We can't do this. So just being really creative in the campaign work we're doing. Or even, for example, like we will, maybe there's something about the sustainability and the packaging of something. So if we can't, necessarily, send the actual good, like the flower or the gummy, if there's something we can do about, we send a recipe card for how you might be able to make like a mocktail at home with the same flavor profile. It's being very creative and trying to get the message out, sending great photography. We spend a lot of time having our clients investing in photography and content, because we can't ship the product. At least they should have a good visual representation or things that are beautiful, for the readers. So we just try to be very, like I said, creative. I keep saying the same word, but that's the only way I can describe it.
Yeah, no, and like you touched upon, as you said, like the social networks, it just clicked in my head, by the way, that like the timing of, Twitter making its foray and popping up at Benzinga, right, was probably right after Elon Musk took over and they were looking for some different revenue when they lost some advertisers.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So that's when he embraced us. That worked out for us. But it's like, the industry will take advantage of wherever it is. Frankly, Governor Cuomo's scandals really helped the New York, cannabis launch. Right. So we'll take whatever we could get, in terms of the name of progress. Sorry, couldn't help myself. Little, so
I love it.
Yeah. What can I say? I believe in the power of words, right? That's why I'm an attorney, and that's why I use my pot puns. So, in such a competitive market, with all these different state markets, people who are playing in different states, hemp-derived cannabinoids, like how and being, the Mattio Communications, right? And as big as you are, how do you approach differentiating clients, from each other, in such a competitive industry?
Yeah. So listen, let's just do the alcohol analogy. You're going to go to the liquor store. There are 30 vodkas, and each of them has their own different brand story, right? So if you're creating a real brand and not just throwing, a label on a package, there's PR to be gotten, or there's marketing to be gotten. And the nice thing about many of the clients we work with, some of these brands are really well thought out, and some of them have like personal stories, and they have, even I'll use one for example, just because it's top of my mind and it's on my desk right now, is dog walkers, right? Which is like a green thumb brand. So it came through because of, Ben Kobler's dog, and he's taking dog for a walk, and there's like a really, and they get back to dogs. So there's like a whole brand that's built on that. So we can do events with, dog shelters or with different, National Dog Day. So if you like have a real brand, you're able to get stories placed, right? So we always say that, it's not really a competition because everybody's got a story to make. And I will say, like, when we pitch clients, like, well, how do you choose a favorite child? And they're doing like a roundup of pre-rolls. I was like, well, you know what? There's going to be a roundup of pre-rolls, right? So you want to be part of that story. So if you work with us and we have the relationships, with the reporters, which is one thing, but also we work with, 6 different pre-roll companies. So we're able to actually go to the reporter and say, hey, mini pre-rolls are a trend. Here's 6, write the story. And we're able to basically hand it over to them because we really have a good subset of what pre-rolls are. So that's like a real additive part of it, because we can actually create the trends and pitch the trends. We see the trends happening because we have such a large vantage point in the industry, and we see what's coming down the pike. That's part of it. The other part of it is, a lot of the times, like most stories, and as a journalist, they're trends. So like a reporter reached out to us, like even for example, Schedule 3 was announced today, it was announced this week. So Bloomberg reached out to us, or Forbes, or, Marijuana Moment, whoever it is. And they were saying, hey, do you have commentary for this? So they don't want one CEO. They want a diverse point of view. They want an operator. They want an ancillary business. They want a public company. They want a private company. So like I said, most stories are trends, and we're able to give the reporter what they need because we have such a large segment of clients. And the third thing I would say about this is when you've got a big announcement, that is your story, right? So let's say we say Jon Purow, he now has his 3rd podcast, right? So that's your story. I'm not talking about somebody else launched today. So you're going to get that whole, by the way, it's not the news release. So don't come to me on that. Okay. I'm just telling you, I'm just using it as an example. But if somebody is launching into a new state or does an acquisition, nobody else can be included in that story. So when you've got a story that is big and is on your own, you're going to get that story. But otherwise, it's good to be working with an agency that really knows what everybody's talking about, what people are working on, what the trends are, so we can actually, have economies of scale with all of our clients to get these stories placed. So that's how I would talk about it.
Got it. I mean, so yeah, like you said, like there's a perk, there's strength in numbers, right? It's a rising tide lifts all ships, as you said, right? And this is what I like about, like the podcast and covering all the news is seeing the trends, right? So as you said, like here's a trend, here's, dog walkers are coming up, right? There's a new product and everything. And so that gives you that, different capability. Rising high lifts all hits. Yeah, I'll work on that. I got to whiteboard that one.
Yes. I believe in you. You're going to get this one right. Exactly. We're going to get T-shirts printed next, actually, with it. When we come up with it.
Yeah, there you go. So I'm just curious, like with how your position in the industry, what are the things, some of the things that have surprised you the most that you've seen happen that you're just like, I'm a little bit surprised it played out that way, or just what are the surprises?
I mean, nothing surprises me anymore, honestly. But
that's the right answer.
I mean, seriously. I will say, on a positive note, when I've worked in many industries before, like I said, when I started cannabis, I already had like 15, 20-year career in communications. I will say that overall, the collaboration between this industry, we just talked about competition. Yes, everyone wants their business to win, but I've never seen such collaboration among most operators or people in this space. Like even, for example, we're helping on the Commerce Clause case, the one that Boyce Schiller is launching against the Attorney General around the overreach. So we are, the steering committee is a lot of the, a lot of different operators of different sizes in the space. And I'm on these calls with people who are quote unquote competitors, and the collaborative nature and how everybody is like you said, like we're going to figure out what the way to say this in the weed pun is, the rising tide lifts all ships, right? It's or boats, like it's really happening. And I love that. And even like on the comm side of thing, like publicists are inherently very competitive. We love the win. Like I said earlier about giving a shit, like we even like 25 years into this, I get like a thing up my spine when I get a hit. So we all feel this way, but you know how often I collaborate with the other publicists or other agencies in the space to make sure that we're getting the stories right? Or even VapeGate, you talked about that campaign to change public perception. Do you know what that was? I think they were 15 to 20 of the publicists at the time. There weren't 20 of us back then, maybe 15 of us got on calls weekly. We're like, how are we going to fix this together? Like nobody, if one of us loses, we all lose here. And we did a lot of work together to change that perception. So that's like that's the most surprising thing I would say in this new industry where like everyone's trying to win and it's budgets are tight and tensions are high. The collaboration, I would say. Also, I would say like all, not a surprise, but just some of like the shift is, and I said like nothing surprises me anymore. Like all of these hopium things, the things we thought would pass, that wouldn't pass, and trying to guess. Everyone should stop guessing. Like I think some people maybe knew there was a little like smattering that would come out April 30th, but nobody really knew. We were just happy that it did. And that morning we're like, is this for real? So there's always a surprise around every corner here.
Yeah, my go-to expression is there's never a dull moment in the dope game. I mean, it's just always something. But it clicked in my head of like, it's a surprising thing. Who would have expected that Mitch McConnell would have inadvertently, legalized, psychoactive cannabinoids? So I guess I'll probably put that up there. But I 100% agree with you. I think that look, I think I came to the first networking event, because I was, self-medicating to help sleep in college, right? But then you meet the people who it has impacted, like medically. Right. The people you encounter, social equity and like folks and like the impact of the war on drugs. And I call them like, my pure pot people. Right. And there are just everyone has that same idea, pushing everything forward. And so when it's the same attorneys that I saw 7 or 8 years ago in New York events when there was no one there, now like doing great. Like, we're all in this together. And as I like to say,
I always say we're all in this together. It's true. It
right?
really is.
And it's a big enough pot pie, everyone can get a slice. Right.
That's true.
And so
I
I
will
just
say this also, there's like, and you mentioned this earlier, like the canister, the new consumer. There's also this, which is actually I find to be the worst part of this industry. This whole idea of like the OGs and the corporate and being like whatever it is, or this person's only in it to make money, right? So I'm gonna say like I was a cannabis consumer in college, right? Then I got married and I had 4 kids back to back, so cannabis was really not a big part of my life. Even though like I smoked a lot of weed in college and I loved it, it just wasn't because I was mostly sober because I was always pregnant. And then we moved to Seattle when I started the cannabis practice, and I started smoking weed a little bit again, not even because I was pregnant. So when I first took on these first clients, and I was nursing, when I first took on these first clients, like I wasn't like a big, consumer, nor was I even that connected to the community. It was just like not part of my life. So when I took on the first project, I just thought it was cool. This is like a new industry. This is fun. This is something different. I'm intellectually curious. So I would say I didn't come in it as like an advocate and I want to raise, the visibility, the power of the plants. That was not how I came in. But to your point, once I started getting in the industry and I started going to events and I started to speak to people and I started to hear the way that it was impacting their lives and learning about the war on drugs and all things that I didn't know was just somebody who would buy a dime baggie from my dealer, that you can't help but become an advocate. So yes, did I come in as corporate trying to make something? Sure as hell did, and sure as hell have, I make no shame about that. But there's no reason you can't be both, where you can't like firmly believe in the power of the plan, firmly want to help social equity, firmly want to raise the thing, but also want to run a healthy, thriving business. So that's like, I think, a really interesting part of it. Like there's nothing wrong with that.
That's what, I just think is, right?
Call me a corporate shill all day long.
No.
Not you.
This
not you. I'm saying in general.
No, but this is the way that I think about it, right? Is that, you've been on this journey for a long time, right? But the fact of the matter is we are still tip of the iceberg of this industry and we are building it together now. And so that's why I like to say, we could smoke our cookies and eat them too, right? We can prosper and do well, right? At the same time that we're doing good because we're building this together. We're creating something together. And so that's the way that I try to look at it. And that's why, one thing I'll say is, we touched upon a little bit about like the social equity, right? There's this unique capacity for this industry to do good, right? And there are, the war on drugs was incredibly harmful. I honestly think that, cures for cancer will come out of the plant that could have come out decades ago if there had been any normal level of research into it, and there wasn't, right? But in the social equity side, right, and talking about that, creating value and everything, regulators try to help specific people in the industry but it's easier, said than done. I'm curious to know, like, and that's why I'm obsessed with the idea of like symbiosis, right? That some of these big businesses, can come up with the right initiatives and can work and to push forward certain social equity concerns. So I'm just kind of curious, any thoughts that you have, right, on that capability of finding these symbiosis and helping the right people while creating value. Any type of like social contract element for like some of the bigger companies, any of your thoughts on, like the creating value like that you'd like to do in terms of doing good in the industry, but it's very, very, difficult for regulators to accomplish it.
Yeah, and I think, the regulators have, very slowly done some things, right? Let's get this to the states, allowed some of these programs. This S3 happening is great, but it moves slow. And a lot of it does come down to like, the public, the companies itself, like what can they do, right? And a lot of this has been, and we work with a lot of these companies. Everybody thinks that, they don't care about social equity, but many of these large operators do. They have huge programs. They spend millions of dollars in trying to do it. They set up brands that, the funds go directly into social equity, or like their hiring practices, or their supplier agreements they're trying to do with, businesses, run by people of color who are affected by the war on drugs. So I think there's a misconception that the big companies don't care. And some of them do, and some of them are not doing a good enough job. We're the first to tell them, like, they say they're looking at board members. I'm like, well, is there a woman or person of color you're talking to right now? And they're like, well, they should be, I don't want to think about it that way. If they're qualified, I'm like, I know, like this whole like D&I thing, maybe like, because of what's happened, over the past few months have been a little bit, there's been pushback on it. But, if you have a choice, like at least we push them on it. We really do. And most of them, will step up to the plate. But I will say it's been very challenging, over the past couple of years, where there's been such a capital crunch, people are really trying to keep their lights on, right? Where if these companies aren't, thriving or not making money, like there's no money to be spread around to do any of these important initiatives, right? And I do believe hiring diverse leadership might help people get to a better bottom line, and top line. But and not necessarily that it's I do think these are must-have when people are just trying to keep their businesses afloat. It is hard to focus on some of the softer sides of the business. So I think now that if more capital coming in, you're going to see more money being put to some of these programs.
Yeah, I think that's one. I think you're 100% right. I think we've been in a very, very tough time for many, many reasons. And so that's why, Schedule 3 goes through, 280E no longer an issue. Everyone gets a shot in the arm of profitability. And then it could open up some of these conversations that were tougher to have when the money was extremely, extremely tight.
But I will say, though, as these companies are having conversations with the legislators, right, I know, like, they are pushing for it, right, for, as part of some of this like incremental change to make sure that we are, and you see some of these CEOs are very, very vocal about this failed war on drugs, and they want to be able, if we could snap their fingers, there's no one there's no operator I know that wants people in jail for drugs. Like nobody wants that anymore, right? So like, part of them is, I do know that they're lobbying to make sure that, Biden or any of the other, lawmakers are keeping true on their promise to get people out of jail. It has to happen. It's like, how can we sleep at night making money when there are people who are in jail for what we're selling right now? I don't think most people can sleep at night around that.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%, right? In terms of meeting some of, the executives at these, the big MSOs and everything, they care, right? And it's just like, it's reaffirming, right? When you encounter people in that, those positions, and they're not can carpetbaggers, right? They are pure pot people, right? Who care about, doing the right thing. So, it's a pleasant surprise, I'd say. So we touched upon it a little bit. There is this, we're at an interview now with, the hemp-derived cannabinoids and the state licensed markets, right? At times, their interests are not necessarily aligned. How do you juggle, having clients, that have varied interests in these two realms?
It's not always easy, even when I made comment a little earlier, I was like, God, I hope I don't get in trouble, because I think some of the operators, larger operators, or some of the operators are doing both, right? So I'm saying, well, I'm a little worried that the education, people are still not used to, are still not used to the regulated, THC market, versus then going to hemp, like that confusion, that might not make some clients happy that I said that, right? Because they're doing both. But I think, listen, I think education is key either way. So, but I still think like part of this, and like I said earlier point, is this normalization, right? So to get
Yeah.
people to understand, to get some of these, people who have not been exposed to cannabis, exposed to it, it's not, especially if it's done the right way, that it's not the big bad wolf. The sky does not fall. People have a hemp beverage afterward. Nothing's going to happen. Probably nothing's going to happen. So I'm in full support of plant-based medicines and just, or plant-based products, and getting more consumers to understand that it's an option for them. So I do think that helps, get more people, in the boat with us.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think ultimately, like, I'm trying to think about it myself, right? Because as you said, it's like juggling different interests is not always easy, right? But ultimately, don't we all just want consistent, safe products in people's hands?
Exactly.
That will normalize this. It's crazy to me, by the way, just how, our immature our society is at certain points, even with like alcohol, right? I remember like I learned to drink when I went to Spain in high school, and it was so different. Right. In the US, it's like, oh, everyone binge drinks. Right.
Right.
And then they get
Exactly.
sent to, then I remember at college, like the first week, it was, there are all the ambulances for the alcohol poisoning for the people who never drank before. Right. Whereas in Spain, it's just like, they had a glass of wine at dinner, and it was so much more of like a mature approach. And it's like, we're in the society and we're trying to get this drug that's been hiding behind the scenes completely normalized, right? And so I think like all of these tiny little things are huge, or very, very important steps in all of this, the different types of beverages that we talked about and products. Speaking of different types of products, the more I learn, the more I realize how little we know about the endocannabinoid system, right? And how they're, and we're just dabbling in minor cannabinoids now, but they all have different applications, like THCV, I'm seeing become more popular now. It's it's effectively like a stimulant, right? It is something that helps you focus and apparently also suppresses your appetite. And so we started seeing that crop up in certain, different products. I'm curious to, your thought on, the progress that's been made in terms of, the CBNs and the CBGs of the world, and, how does that help that normalization process? What do you kind of see in terms of it playing out with different types of products? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's something interesting about it. And you touched a little earlier about like this whole, this myth of sativa and indica, right? It just like people want a product, no matter, forget about even weed or whatever it is, like that, that suits their needs, right? So in the beginning, we worked with Candescent from day one, and everybody laughed at this effects-based architecture and whether or not it worked or not, like, calm, connect, cool. But it did help people understand, like, well, this is the problem I'm trying to solve here. So maybe this product will work for me. But I still think, to your point, like the research, really needs to get to the point where it's delivering on the promise of what it says it can do, right? And I think a lot of the companies have resources are doing so much R&D to make sure that's the right product. And I think it's very exciting, and to bring more people again to the market, or people have better experiences in the market because the product works for them. But I will say there's still so much research to be had. And even for myself, I'm a terrible sleeper. Like I need a lot to sleep. When CBN has been amazing for me.
Yep.
But then I realized recently, and people have this experience with edibles a lot, or maybe with cannabis, like that whole like paranoia sometimes that can turn on if you remember every awkward thing you ever said, sometimes like with this, a little bit of paranoia that some people get, some people don't. I do. And then recently I took a plain CBN product. I think it was a wild gummy that was just CBN. I was able to buy it when I was in Nevada. You can sell plain CBD or like non, THC products. I bought, someone said, try this. And I tried it, and I was able to sleep so much better because my mind didn't turn on. It was just the CBN. So it's just so interesting. Like, I think the research needs to get there to find the right product, but also it'll be curious to see the research about like how people metabolize it, right? Because not necessarily the same as the pill, because like usually with the gummy with the sugar, and so every body is different. So I still think like we have not even scratched the surface, because we know the cannabinoids work, but like the different formulations and how a person decides the right formulation is like, there's just so much out there. So I think it's gonna be very cool to see it plays out. I happen to love THCV. Also, like gets me. I sometimes take a little gummy before I work out. Sometimes does give me a little go juice. So I'm excited about what we can learn from this plant. We only have a couple out there that people even know about: CBN, CBG, THCV, THCA, but like nobody's really talking about any of the minor ones yet in a big way. So I'm pumped.
No, I mean, and I think the last count, the Israelis are ahead of us in all the research. I think the last count is that they're like 140 cannabinoids, right? And we're not even then talking about, flavonoids and everything. There was a study I covered on the podcast at some point where a flavonoid, right, possibly like the least consequential part of the plant, wiped out incurable pancreatic cancer in a rat colony. So they're doing a full bore study at Harvard.
Wow.
Right. So, it is astounding how little we know. And I think that you're 100% right that the science has to lead the way. There are going to be all of these incredible applications, whether they're medical or effect-based, right? And we have to let the science guide us, because right now we're just in, anecdotal land. And, we want, as me and the theme we've been kind of coming back to again and again is we want kind of consistent expectations, products, delivered to people. So as we're nearing the end here, I always like to play, but I've never been able to choose it one. So you choose, Rosie, right? Do you want to play Tokerdamus or Smokerdamus, right? Pretend I'm giving you your, wizard hat that looks like a joint, and I just want you to think, any predictions you want to throw out there on the short term and the long term, things you're excited to see, things you think will play out, just, riff.
Oh God. I mean, there's so much that I want for this industry, I would say, right? I would love to see this a more equitable industry. I'd love to see more female and minority leadership at the top. But I do think, it's been a tough 2 years, right? And I'm a believer. So I do think, while, the stocks popped when the S3, announcement, whatever it is, rumors came out, and then they dropped the next day. I'm a believer that we're not going anywhere. Yes, some companies might go away in the interim, and that makes me sad because I don't want innovation or see any companies, go under. But my prediction is that, but one day, you're saying this is builders, and one day we are going to look back and hopefully be proud that we did this right. But people who have abandoned this or left to go to other industries, like that makes me sad. So I believe that people who got in, toughed it through the hard times, and like see this through will hit the bit on the upswing. So like that's just my message here. Just like I know it's not easy all the time. I know we've seen like downsizing in the industry. I know especially publicists were announcing bad news a lot, but I'm a believer if you believe in the plants, you work in integrity, do this right. Like we're all people who got in here early or not early or getting in and really are believers will succeed. So that's my thing. Stick with it. We're gonna be here for the duration.
I think that is an excellent way to end on a nice optimistic note, right? So why don't we say that the grass is greener on the other side, right? It's still, we're on the winning side of history, right? Is ultimately what it comes down to. The fact is that you said that
and say we're proud about the work we did. But that's the thing. When I look back in 10 years, like, I don't need to be publicly for it, but I would like to look back and say, got in here early, did the right things, made great relationships. They don't pay the pilot to fly in good weather, right? And that, we stuck with this and have an industry that, that's gonna be here forevermore, because it will be. Like alcohol's not going away. Any of these industries that built, like trains are here, so whatever it is. So, be early builder.
Awesome. All right. Well, all right. I want to thank you so much for, taking the time. I appreciate it. It was as fun as I thought it was going to be.